Hi everyone, my name's Josh Gallagher. Welcome back to the Loop Live from MediaCom. Really excited this week. We've got a really special topic that I'm going to talk about in a moment. A little bit about Loop Live. We're here to help marketers see the bigger picture and really help brands, but also agencies take a bigger perspective on the world. And I think today is really going to help us do that. We're going to hear from our team in China and a marketer in China about how they've spoken to C-suite level executives on the recovery. And I think I'm really interested in this session because we're not just going to glorify some of those clients that have had huge amounts of success. In the past on the Loop Live, we've spoken about CPG brands that have had 170% increases. We've seen huge increases in things like e-commerce, in gaming, in streaming. But I think it's really good to take a slightly different lens. And we're going to do that today. And we're going to get a little bit of insight into how brands can grow in the recovery and talk to a marketer that actually comes from one of the areas that was probably the biggest hit within the pandemic about what they're doing, how this insight helps them, and what's the new way forward given China's progression within the recovery. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Rupert to start off with, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they're going to talk about today. So thanks, Rupert.
Hey, thanks, Josh, and hello, everybody. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Rupert McPetrie, and I'm the MediaCom CEO for Greater China. So look, as Josh says, last year coming into this year was, I think for everybody, a time of extremes. One of the things I particularly felt leading the business in China 12 months ago, 13, 14 months ago, was we were getting asked questions that were way beyond what would normally be considered the media agency territory. As business CEOs, business leaders, CMOs in China were trying to understand how to navigate out of the pandemic, how to find areas to return to growth. They were obviously seeking new information, new benchmarks, and different perspectives. And in response to that, because these questions were so broad and way beyond a normal media assignment, we actually established a consulting division, differentiated offering, designed to answer some of these really tough but super critical business questions. Typically in China, this is around how to balance e-commerce and traditional retail. It's around how to look at different regions in China. And this was a very hot topic because clearly the recovery in China moved at slightly different speeds in slightly different regions and cities and territories. So we set up this standalone division called Incite to address these business questions. It's very much a consulting model. And we launched this just in the second half of last year. We've had a lot of success, actually, helping clients not just navigate return to growth in China, but particularly with multinational clients looking at China for extra recovery. I think one of the truths we felt in the business is now more than ever, there's more focus, more expectation on the China businesses to deliver, not just in China, but for global. So more pressure, more expectation. And with that, I'll bring in SawGin, who is our lead on Incite, our dedicated consulting division. Share with you some of the headlines around this research to find growth.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for having us here today. So as how Rupert have explained, coming out of the COVID landscape, we felt it was crucial for us to capture the voices of China's top business executives of different skill sets, knowledge, different industries across four major cities in China. For us to understand and to identify what are the key strategies that companies will take this year and beyond. So if we look at what's happening today, we are looking at China being the first and only economy that has kind of bounced back from the pandemic. Also in terms of the amount of innovation and new products that's introduced into the market. We are looking at an innovation index which reached 200 over index in 2019, and we are going to see a lot more of these new product launches in the next 10 years. What is also interesting, and digitalization is probably one of the words that we keep hearing, and in fact, it's not new. This whole sense of digitalization is probably around even way before COVID-19. But coming out of that survey, what was mentioned is as though we are looking at an acceleration of 10 times more post-COVID. So this is all about having speed, having that agility, being lean, being nimble, and China's speed is kind of redefined. So today we are looking at supercharging, and a really critical word that we keep hearing these days would be hyper speed to market. So before I get into the key business strategies, it is important to know the key driving forces affecting these business strategies. The first one, as I mentioned, digitalization has been around for a while and very much accelerated by COVID. And we are seeing a lot more acceleration in terms of digital transformation, or depending on how mature are some companies, we are saying, we are indicating that it is a lot more of a reformation rather than transformation. So in all areas of businesses, whether is it manufacturing, production, distribution, we are seeing a lot more faster to market acceleration, and companies are no longer dependent on physical distribution, now looking into more use of AI, unmanned retail, industrial 3.0 approaches to track and to speed up logistics. In terms of this geographical diversity, there is also an acceleration of economic development into more interior cities. So we are now looking beyond the typical tier 1, tier 2 cities, but there are more and more interests around the lower tier cities. And this will definitely drive a growing low to middle class segments. This will continue again with the recent 5-year plan announcement by the government. There is a lot of emphasis and focus on certain industries in different geographical focus. The lower tier income gap, now we are post-COVID-19, we are seeing a lot more university graduates versus the number of available jobs in the market. There's definitely has created a downward pressure on salaries, and with the rise of living costs and have lesser disposable income, consumers are now becoming a lot more value driven. And when we look at outward, there are so much global uncertainties, and businesses in China are now seeking future-proof growth strategies by insulating itself, ensuring a lot more self or domestic business support. So the manifestation of these shifts resulted in new commercial imperatives. So we look at the first part, it's all about speed to innovation, speed to market, speed to close the sales loop. It's definitely critical to gain market share. Wider new lower income segments in lower tier cities also means that a business needs to be ready to cater to this emerging segment in the low tier, and the lower income gap means people are seeking more value, spending less frequently, and they are now beginning to reevaluate how they should be spending their money. Businesses are sourcing more support domestically to ensure their business gets continuous support to be able to future-proof itself. So today, I will be giving you a top-line view on the 7 strategies which we have identified coming out of the survey that we have conducted. But for the purpose of today, we will be focusing on 2 very specific ones, which is the elevate the value proposition, as well as how can we satisfy the silver generation, which is of interest and a little bit more surprising, especially for industries which is under a lot of pressure. So, as mentioned, premiumization has been around for a while, and a lot of categories and brands would think that, well, premiumization would be a go-to strategy in order to capture growth. But this approach, we are seeing that more and more it's not working for all categories and industries in this current economic climate. So there are a real need for business to evaluate the value proposition for certain categories. As for reevaluate e-commerce, as cost of customer acquisition continues to increase on e-commerce, more and more businesses are now saying they are reevaluating and prioritizing their e-commerce approach. So there is a need for very different strategies, online versus online, in order to maximize growth potential in the long term. Going into the third point on brand OS, post-COVID, we are seeing a renewed, interestingly, we are seeing a renewed offline retail interest, especially now with an oversupply of retail spaces, lower rental costs, and businesses are realizing that there is a need for them to create very meaningful brand experiences to attract and to connect younger consumers. The fourth strategy around arm's length innovation, here it is really about having speed to market. More MNCs are now setting up their innovation hub in Asia, and in order for them to do a quick rollout to compete with more agile local businesses. And on the other hand, if we look at the local players, they are also moving a lot faster, working along with manufacturers to test and to produce new products. So there is a sense of local players creating new products, rolling it out. If it's successful, fine. If it's not, let's pull it out and then we push another new product. So there is a lot of agility and flexibility when we look at and when we observe local players in the marketplace. Sustainability, and again, this is a much discussed topic on how interested are consumers when it comes to the topic on sustainability. And interestingly enough, coming out of the survey, what our respondents are saying is that this is really a global push or a push by companies rather than driven by consumer demand. When a product or a company push or to sell the sustainable story, it is a nice to have. And if it is priced at the right price, then it will definitely create consumer interest and demand. Otherwise, it wouldn't go well with consumers locally. And last but not least, China is an increasing aging society. I think in past weeks, we have seen some news headlines around the aging society in China. And the question would be, are businesses ready to cater to this untapped segment? So for today's purpose, as I mentioned, we'll focus on two key strategies. The first one, elevate the value proposition, and why is this important for our consideration now? Many markets are experiencing a declining GDP growth, and I think this is common across all countries, including China. Despite the recovery rate, we are still seeing slow GDP growth and will likely continue in the next 5 years, depending on how quickly countries recover from the current pandemic. And there's also a rise of lower tier with lower disposable income. And on the other hand, we are also seeing first tier cities having a lot more pressure in terms of cost of living. And people are generally no longer optimistic about having a more disposable income. So, which results in consumers becoming increasingly affluent and savvy in seeking value, and not all categories with premiumization strategies will win. So, future growth will come from entry-level offering. Businesses need to tap into the lower middle class aspirations, but the challenge for many foreign companies will be to find a really good local partner who can deliver that quality that the company requires, as well as staying true to the company values. In our survey, what was also interesting coming out of the response was that some companies have also indicated launching value ranges online only, while keeping to their premium and aspiration high in physical retail stores. So I thought that was really a nice way to customize and to define the strategies, and not having one common strategies across all channels. So now moving to satisfying silver. As mentioned, many businesses have the aspiration targeting young consumers. Sometimes in our office discussion, I tend to say I get really jittery when clients and customers, our clients, would have it in their brief that let's talk to Gen Z, let's appeal to the young generation. But really, we are seeing a sharp increase of silver generation. And we are looking at 100 million new 60 plus wealthy retirees in the next 10 years. Shanghai alone has 35% 60 plus in 2020, and the household of 56 to 64-year-old, they own the most assets per household on average. So this means that businesses need to begin seriously reshaping their offering to cater to this rising segment, and they will need to they will be the future growth coveted by marketers in the coming decades. The question is, are we looking into this opportunity today? Because that would require companies to consider and to include their business decisions towards ramping up knowledge in terms of offering certain features which are friendly to the silver generation, new functions, service offering, product lines to connect with this generation, and perhaps reassessing our approach in our marketing when we cater to this segment. So what can companies do now to succeed? We recommend four focus areas. One being brand power, building brand power. And in a fast transactional short-term mindset world that we are now in coming out of post-COVID, companies really need to reassess building their brand power in order to protect brand equity over making fast online sales. Speed to market is key to capture growth, especially competing with local players. Companies need to find a balance between long-term product innovation versus quick market product rollout. And as I mentioned earlier about not having a one-size-fits-all strategy, as the landscape becomes a lot more competitive, companies no longer can roll out just one strategy across nationally. They need to assess the different dynamics between online versus offline, urban cities versus low-tier cities, and then customize the strategies accordingly. And having done number three, then that would have implications to having smarter business investments, and this will also help us identify where our ROIs will come from. It will also help us make smarter, more efficient, more effective business investment. So I will pass the session over to Rupert and Brendan to discuss some challenging questions on the industry that Brendan is in. So over to you, Rupert, Brendan.
Is Rupert frozen?
Can you hear me, guys?
Yes.
Good. Sorry, technology, right? Some really interesting themes there, SawGin. Thank you. And I know just how valuable they are to some of our clients. I'd like to introduce quickly a client, a friend of ours who we've worked with in good days and some slightly more challenging days. Brendan Tansey. As per Josh's introduction, I'd imagine your business has faced more challenges. Your sector, with the impact on travel, your business must have had more challenges than most in the last 12 to 14 months. Could you give us a bit of context?
Yes, well, it's been a kind of oh my God moment. I came back from Chinese New Year in 2020, knowing things would be getting interesting. And we came back thinking, okay, we're going to have to cancel the first half China cruises in 2020. And then it became rapidly clear we're going to have to cancel all cruises in China in 2020. And then we realized it wasn't just a China problem, it was going to halt our whole global operations. So we have the twin issues of having to refund thousands, hundreds of thousands of guests around the world and trying to maintain a big fleet around the world.
Yeah, not easy. How did you survive? Do it.
The biggest thing was dealing with uncertainty. As you know, Rupert, we're a 4-year-old startup in China, and we'd always had a hill that we were charging at. So there was a lot of certainty about what we were trying to achieve, and really not knowing when we could restart, how we could restart, which products could restart, and having those things not in our definition. They were either up to a virus or up to a government about whether we could do that, meant that we just had to get comfortable with uncertainty and having multiple scenarios that we could flick the switch on at the appropriate time.
Sure. I mean, that scenario planning, I think, for your business must have been critical. And look, I see the news, vaccines coming online. I got my first shot a couple of days ago, which is good. Obviously lots of sort of, talk of, return to flights. I see the UK is opening up, for example. You've got a very... How do you see the landscape now, Brendan, with all these domestic demand and borders potentially opening?
I think the domestic demand in China is a very bright spot, and we've pivoted the whole business towards launching a domestic product in China. In fact, making a joint venture with China Merchant Group, so that we could have a Chinese flag on the back of one of our ocean ships and operate it off the coast of China. So that's probably the biggest change, I think. But that's a worldwide change. So next year we launch ships on the Mississippi for America, which is our largest market, and ships on the Great Lakes between America and Canada. So the emphasis to have local products of capacity is very much there. And we've actually just restarted operations in the UK this week. So we have the real owners of Downton Abbey and most of the cast on the ship, and it's calling it Falmouth today. And the ship had a naming ceremony, the new Viking Venus. We're restarting out of Malta, and we're restarting out of Bermuda. But these cruises are for fully vaccinated guests only, and we've had to refit the ships with full PCR labs on board, an increased clinic, and totally re-engineer the air systems to have UVC filters in all the air systems, UVC robots that sanitize all surfaces. So it's been a total rethink.
Wow. So you've reimagined the domestic markets, and you've repurposed that more traditional sort of international market as well. So I guess you're feeling a bit more confident for 2021, or are you still concerned?
We're feeling a lot more confident. I think the Indian issue tells us this is going to be with us for a while with different variants. But we've because of the work we've done on the ships and on the health side, we have a way to operate in the American prevalence before Christmas. So we got a retired US Vice Admiral on board who was head of the Combined Armed Services Health Task Force, and she's been building that program with us, doing all the computer models about spread, that help us to put the lab strategy in place. Because speaking to your point about silvers, most of our guests are 55 plus. They're the people most at risk, and they're the people most risk averse anyway. So we had to do a total rethink of what was going to give them confidence to cruise again.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real challenge, and I guess you also have multiple scenario plans in place as the situation evolves. But when you look at the year ahead, what are the sort of critical junctions for you ahead, and how do you see maybe trends that you're catching this year in 2021 that you can take forward into 2022?
I think there's in travel specifically, there's a couple of big trends. So because of the border being closed in China, there is a cry out for more diverse domestic high-end tourism product. And the cruise that we're building locally, you don't need a passport. The boarding experience is the same as getting on a high-speed train. You swipe your ID card. All our guests will be vaccinated. We'll have the PCR labs on board the Chinese ship too. But you'll be entirely within China and the safe bubble of China from the point of view of COVID. So one is that high-end but high value, as SawGin was saying. So a lot of inclusions in terms of people getting a lot of value for the product. The other thing is the more adventure travel. I think as travel starts to come back, people have been bucket listing all the things they never got to do before COVID and all the exotic things they want to do. And that's the reason behind us really launching an Arctic and an Antarctic ship in 22. And they're going to be the biggest, greenest Arctic ships in the world. They can really take more people to that place in comfort. The Arctic ships are typically pretty uncomfortable little icebreakers, but these will be proper, comfortable ocean liners.
I can imagine that, beautiful Viking experience, either, Arctic or Antarctic would be an amazing opportunity, as you say, for that silver generation, perhaps after, as you say, a bucket list. That'd be fascinating. I did want to just ask a follow-up, Brendan. We're fortunate enough to work, in addition to your business, with a few airlines and hotel and hospitality type businesses. And there's a question floating around that I want to pose to you, in that obviously borders are going to open up progressively, maybe with some form of vaccine passport and so on and so forth. But there's a question floating around, is there going to be a lag effect between the opportunity to travel and the real appetite to take advantage of that opportunity?
Definitely, and I think it's going to vary by demographic or age group. I think the young, who are less at risk by nature from this and less risk averse, will be dying to get out there. The older people will take their time. They'll pick their time, and I think particularly in China, they very much follow government advice about what is safe to do and not safe to do. So I think we're going to see a phased thing where the world slowly opens up and so different groups get comfortable with traveling again.
Sure, I think that's absolutely right. So I know we're running towards the end of this session, but I did just want to pivot back away from business and a bit more to sort of media and marketing. So through the lens of these opportunities and the various pivots that your business has made, what are the sort of key priorities from a media and marketing point of view this year?
One of them, I mean, up until now has been, now that we're not operating, so we're not seeing our guests regularly, how could we keep in contact with them? So we launched Viking TV, which was a way that while everybody was locked in their living room, we could still bring interesting content from around the globe. We could show them what was happening in different markets and how people were dealing with the virus. And we still had cultural commentators coming in there. I think that idea of actually rich content is really important to us. And through that Viking TV, we've made a lot more contacts with cultural commentators who can bring that content to us. And even when we do the Arctic ships, we're going to have Arctic exploration labs on board. So the guests will be able to see the labs, they'll be able to talk to the scientists, look at the work they're doing in the Arctic and the Antarctic. And so that rich content that can be part of the experience, but also shared digitally afterwards, is a big focus of ours.
I think that whole area of customer relationship, maintaining dialogue has been so key, hasn't it, in the last month? So yeah, I think you're absolutely right in terms of having those experience for the for the people on board, but also the assets, the content assets available. Brendan, thank you. I can see Josh has reappeared, which is my sign.
Thank you, Rupert.
Thank you, Brendan.
Yeah, this is the wind up, Rupert. No, but I just wanted to come back to thank you all for that. I found that really interesting. I think the one big takeaway from me, Brendan said it around being comfortable with uncertainty, and I think that's something that we've all had to become comfortable with over the last 12 months or so. But the one thing for businesses, whether they've been really successful in this period or whether it's been a really challenging time, is to really reassess that value proposition, right? Because value proposition and what consumers expect out of an experience is something that's fundamentally changing for someone that's taking a $10,000 cruise or someone that's buying a $10 chocolate bar and shampoo from a supermarket. So I think that's changing, and I think that's really interesting. Those big structural changes are things that we're having to get used to, but also consumer changes and the way that they interact together. And that brings me, I suppose, to next week. And next week, we're going to touch on some of the ways that content has changed. And I found that really interesting from you, Brendan, around how you're rethinking about content and still engaging with people. And in our next Loop Live, we're going to talk about co-viewing, because that's one thing that's really changed from how people watch TV, how people consume content, is because people are together more, they're actually viewing more. So that's going to be the big topic next week. But for now, thank you, Brendan, especially for joining us as a one-off. Thank you, Rupert, and thank you, SawGin. And we'll follow up with some of the key learnings from the session. So to everyone, thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.